So we are so privileged to have Jonathan Feldstein with us tonight, all the way from Israel. And he is going to be talking to us about Hanukkah and maybe some maybe misconceptions, maybe some revelations, definitely some illumination, right? Absolutely. And so we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. This is a real treat for us. So if you want to tell more about yourself, Jonathan,
Sure.
I'm just going to give it all over to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, I hope I will contend that it's more pleasure for me to be here than for myself than for you to be here with me. Although I'll be glad to hear you refute that afterward. It really is a pleasure on so many levels. Victoria, to be here in your home and with you, but also as part of your fellowship. You know this, and a couple of other friends who I know before are here. I do a lot of speaking in churches, and typically it's more at a introductory level. And this isn't, and it can't be. And it challenges me. So I need to put out there straight away that I'm not an expert on anything other than me. So full questions, and if you have a question I can't answer, I'll tell you I can't answer it, or we'll find out the answer. And I also like to say that unless I'm alone in the room, I'm never the smartest person in the room. And I think that's probably the case here as well. But it's really a privilege to be here. Just quickly about myself. As you can hear from my accent, I haven't had a chance to speak to everybody substantially yet, although I look forward to that. I was born here in the US, grew up in New Jersey, spent several years in Atlanta, including my undergraduate at Emory, and then went back up north in 1990 to meet my wife and begin our family, and we're married this June is 30 years. We, in 2004, so 18 plus years ago, we made Aliyah. It was something that God put on my heart from when I was an adolescent. I don't know, I do know why, I understand, but I don't know why, like many things God does. It was the first time I was in Israel, and God showed me that Israel was not only a great place to raise children, and I was a child myself. It's really puzzling how I would have that vision, but that it was where I needed to live. As a friend of mine says, rather than watching, I was joking over there, people sitting in the chairs, being in the bleachers, rather than watching from the bleachers, he says he's in the starting five. I don't know if I'm in the starting five, but I'm certainly on the 50-yard line. You can use lots of sports metaphors. So in 2004, we packed up our whole house in a 40-foot shipping container and imported our first 5 kids along with us. Our 6th was born a year after we made Aliyah. He just got his driving lesson, his driving license. So if you come to Israel, we have another reason to watch out because of traffic. Not that we don't have enough reasons. And it's a tremendous blessing. And I'm not going to speak about all of that now, but look forward to future conversations. As far as why am I here, I know that I'm not the first Orthodox Jew who's come through your home and this fellowship, but it's, for me, it's a passion and it's calling. And I wish someone has the technology one day to put a USB port right here. You could download the images, very vivid, still today, of the first time I was in a church. I don't know the date. It was the late 80s. It was 1988 or 89. And I had graduated Emory and I was working for the Israeli consulate. Some of you who have in Atlanta, some of you who have an historic memory will remember that 1988, 89, Israel was in the midst of what was then called the first Intifada. Well, no, then it was called the Intifada because we didn't know we were going to have a second one that we needed to name the second and first. So it was the original Intifada. Fascinating for another conversation. My boss at the Israeli consulate was the first Israeli Arab to head a diplomatic mission overseas. I learned a lot from him. Lovely, lovely man. I would go in as a young Zionist Jewish person, writing his speeches and letters and things that he needed to submit, but writing them from the perspective that I came from. There's no way I could transport myself to become an Israeli Arab to write in his voice, at least not yet. We learned that, and that was a really great skill. And I joke that when the diplomats were either too lazy or too busy, they would send me to go and speak as a young man in my 20s to speak about Israel at a time in Israel's history, perhaps arguably since 1982, but at a time where Israel was getting beaten up in the media, where there was no good news coming from Israel. And I use that pun intentionally. Very problematic time, and they would send me to Alabama and South Georgia and the Carolinas and Tennessee, and there's this one day, I always have to say his name because I'm so praying someone will find him. A very tall, thin black man named Bill Cherry picked me up in my apartment on Buford Highway and drove me to Cleveland, Tennessee. First time I had heard there was a Cleveland in Tennessee. I just knew about the one in Ohio where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is.
We have one here.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
No.
Oh, Cleveland. Okay. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame got me excited for a minute. But I didn't know the significance of Cleveland, Tennessee as being the home of the Church of God. I didn't know that there was a Church of God. I didn't, so and it was the first time, with the possible exception of when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey. My mother took me and my two younger brothers on a day outing in New York one day, and we went into St. Patrick's is the Catholic church there, I think. St. Patrick's. So she wanted us to see other cultures. My mother didn't understand much of that herself, but she thought it was important for us to see. So I went in, but this is the first time I was really in a church. And I walked in, again, you could get USB and download it still today, in action, not stills. I'm sitting, I wish I knew what I said, but I know what happened to me. It's what God called me to be a bridge between Jews and Christians. There were Christians on a stage, wearing blue and white costumes, singing Israeli songs, Hebrew songs, and dancing Israeli folk dances. And the 22, 23, 24-year-old in me, I don't know how old I was, had no idea why. Why would Christians be celebrating Israel? Why would Christians care about Israel? And I knew I didn't understand it, but I knew that was what God was calling me to be part of it, to be a bridge. Fast forward, it took me a little while. My career initially went in a different direction, and of course it took me making Aliyah in 2004 to really be able to bring that calling to action. I've shared this part with you, Victoria. I'm really proud of it. I had worked for a couple of organizations while I was in Israel that were very happy for me to work and raise money among Christians. But that's the only thing that they wanted to do. I refer to it as, I write a lot on Charisma and All Israel News and Christian Headlines and a couple of other sites. And I'm not, if I forget them, it's not because they're less significant. I'm just tired. It's been a long 2 weeks. I don't remember all the places that publish my stuff. And it's so amazing to me, so humbling and privileged that I get to write as an Orthodox Israeli Jew for all of these Christian websites. But once I wrote, in 2017, once I kind of came out and I wrote for a Jewish publication, which has since been edited and republished this year in the Jerusalem Report magazine. And I wrote, we were talking about Yiddish. There's a Yiddish phrase, a shanda for the goyim, an embarrassment in front of the Gentiles. And that has a double meaning, but I used that as my title of the article, in which I called out the proclivity of Israeli and Jewish people and organizations, because I am that and I can call them out, though it happens among Christians and ministries and some with which you're aware. The objectification of Christians as a faith-based ATM. I reject that. I reject the idea that the only way to bless Israel is a monetary donation. And the only relationship is that transactional relationship. So after a while, I got very bold, put on my big boy pants and walked away from organizations like that. And in 2018, started the Genesis 123 Foundation, as in Genesis 12:3, to really do what God called me to do, not measuring my success in dollar signs, but to put in relationships. And our mission is to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new, unique, and meaningful. So I'm not going to be the next person you're going to see on the circuit running around teaching Torah to Christians, though you know them and they're great. That's not my strength, nor do I want to go into what other people are doing. We have a whole long list, and this is not meant to be a commercial advertisement, but rather just to give you to get into my head where I'm coming from and ultimately why I'm here now. We started, in 2018, I met with the mayor of Jerusalem. His name is Nir Barkat still, then he was mayor of Jerusalem. Nir Barkat is probably one of the wealthiest politicians in Israel, and having had some successful startups and exits. And he is also a runner, and gave birth to the Jerusalem Marathon about a decade ago.
He also was the only one who didn't take a salary.
He also didn't take a salary, and that's so interesting you say that. Not only did he not take a salary, he refused, because in Israel everything's done by bank transfers. Mm-hmm. He refused to give the municipality and then the Knesset. When he became elected to Knesset, he refused to give his bank information so that they couldn't transfer a salary to him. He's a tremendous leader, and I said to him, as mayor, you've got this Jerusalem Marathon going. Did you ever think about promoting it to Christians? Mm-hmm. No, I'm not a runner. I refer to marathon as the M word. But he got it. But I explained to him, I said, if you're a Christian and you're a runner, this, as if we were sitting in Jerusalem at the time, is the most significant place that you'll ever run. Mm-hmm. Not New York and Boston or Tokyo or Athens or London or any of the other more famous marathons. So we put together Run for Zion, which was a great little success in 2019. Grew by tenfold in 2020, except we had a little thing called COVID-19 that shut it down 10 days before. So now we're rebuilding in this March. The Jerusalem Marathon is back on, and Run for Zion is back on. And because God does not say in Genesis 12:3, from which we get our name, Genesis 1-2-3 Foundation, God doesn't say, bless Israel, I'm the Lord your God. He says, bless Israel, I'm going to bless you. You're going to get something. Mm-hmm. Now, there are an infinite number of ways that God can and does bless us, and I don't begin to play God, but I decided that part of our formula for the Run for Zion is if you choose to raise money. Again, no one's required, because I reject that idea that you have to raise a certain amount of money. Even though to run in the major marathons in the world, you have to raise a certain amount of money. That was not my model. It is not my model. But if you choose to go that way through crowdfunding, we provide subsidies that can make the trip nearly free, $149 this year. And that's cool. And I'm really proud of it. And what day is today? Sunday? A week ago Friday, I was in Tennessee. I got a phone call from a guy named Caleb, who's been following my podcast. I'm the only Orthodox Jew with a weekly program on Israel on the Charisma Podcast Network, which is also kind of cool and getting a lot of listeners. And I'm honored by that. So Caleb is listening to my podcast and saying, I used to be a runner. I want to run again. 4 months is exactly the amount of time I need to run. And Jonathan, we wouldn't be having this conversation if you didn't have the subsidy model, because I can't afford to go to Israel. I said, Caleb, then I'm going to help you every way possible to raise the money so you can get those subsidies that we offer. When the pandemic hit and Israel shut down and no one knew how long that was going to go for, I started a webinar series, Inspiration from Zion, which then was so successful that Charisma invited me to morph that into a podcast. So now I do more podcasting on a weekly basis than the webinars, but we still do webinars. It was actually very interesting. The webinars morphed into something that we called the Global Prayer for Israel and Virtual Pilgrimage. Sukkot that year, no one was coming to Israel, not Christians, not Jews. And that was the first pilgrimage. That was the first feast, biblical festival that no one was coming. No, Passover, I suppose. Oh, all of them. That was the third already. Wow. But it was profound, because that's especially when so many Christians come. So we created, to date, it's still one of the, and I'm bragging because I'm so proud of it. And I couldn't have planned it as successful as it was. It was all God. It ended up becoming a 13-hour live event, live meaning live prayers, and then we interspersed videos, beginning in China, with underground churches in Chinese praying for Israel, then moving to India, then moving to Israel, Africa, Europe, across the ocean, to the Americas, I don't remember how many countries, and I don't remember how many languages. The coolest prayer, well, no, there were a few. One of the coolest was in Swahili from Congo. Then we closed off with prayers in the native languages of Hawaii and Alaska. I don't know what those languages even are. They didn't teach me that in junior high school here in the US. And then I still had videos of people praying, so we just said, people are waking up in Australia and New Zealand and Japan, so let's just roll the videos. 13 hours is so unbelievable, and to date in my life, one of the most incredible things. And this goes to the point about objectifying Christians as a faith-based ATM. There was an opportunity video, but we weren't monetizing it. It's prayer. You can't do that. Prayer is between you and God, and you can't monetize. There's no swipe or tap or anything like that. That doesn't work. Last thing I just want to share, because I happen to bring them and it's in front of me. By the way, these are gifts. Oh, actually, it's relating to this. You can take them home if you want, but these are gifts. Genesis 12:3 concludes with what? I will bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you, and
Through you, all the families on the earth.
through you, the families of the earth will be blessed. And we spoke about this the other day, right? In fact, the Hebrew word is families. I had to check on that, because I always used to say nations. It's not nations, it's families. And that's significant to something that we did. We, as the Jewish people, need to embody, embrace that. And yes, one can say, you're the light, Jewish people are the light unto the nations. Okay, I accept that. But that's not necessarily a proactive affirmation. That happens because we exist and because of our history and those who take action. But I feel that we need to be proactive. So this year, and it's bulleted in a few of them, I forgot some of them already. But we met because of some of you know Ann Stacy. I visited her in June. She was my first stop after arriving from Israel, and I made a big mess on her driveway. Well, remember you had a shortage of baby formula here in the US? I think it's more or less not that way anymore. I flew to America with my daughter, who was spending the summer here. She was allowed to have one bag. I had allowance with United Airlines. Because of my status, I get 3 70-pound bags.
Wow.
And for anyone who I travel with. So my daughter, who was traveling anyway and couldn't do more than one bag, we checked in at Ben Gurion Airport the night before with 6 70-pound bags, 3 of which were filled with baby formula. So I carried 200 pounds of baby formula. Honestly, I was a little nervous coming through the airport and customs in Chicago.
This is white substance.
Well, several of the containers broke, and there was white substance leaking out of some of the canvas bags. So I thought that would be kind of funny. And I stopped at Ann's, and I opened these things, and some of the broken ones spilled all over her. She was so gracious. She said, "Jonathan, I've had so many people come through my house. No one's ever come bringing presents like this." And the baby formula went to 2 churches here in the Dallas area.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really great. Us being a blessing. And when I looked up the word, I needed to know. Family is not nations, it's families. And how much more the definition of blessing the families, bringing Hebrew lettered baby formula that's going on the kitchen counter of families who couldn't go to the local Walgreens or CVS or Tom Thumb to buy baby formula. I don't know how long it lasted, but what a blessing. This was made as a result. Next month is the anniversary from when horrific tornadoes touched down all over Kentucky. I just remember it was on a Saturday because Shabbat ended and I turned on my TV and I was probably watching Fox and I was looking at the devastation that had happened. And I began praying, what can we do? What can I do? Me, Jonathan, and then globally Genesis 1-2-3 Foundation. So what had been destroyed? Homes and churches. I thought we'll bring a mezuzah. We'll bring dozens of mezuzot, which we had done once in Lake Charles after two hurricanes hit there, I sent dozens of Jerusalem stone mezuzot to a pastor friend there, and they gave them out to people as they were rebuilding and finishing their homes. So I said, well, okay, we'll do the same thing. And a very smart rabbi said to me, Jonathan, that's stupid, because a lot of people won't recognize the thing on the doorpost, won't know what's in it, won't know the significance, even if they are recognizing it. So he said, make something that's graphic, that's artistic. So what you see here, and I have in the car in Spanish as well, is all of the text from Deuteronomy that goes in the mezuzah, and the Hebrew, and the art that I had commissioned, that we own. And I drove to Kentucky, and I spent 4 days in Kentucky giving these out, to the point that so successful and so meaningful, not successful, it touched hearts months after. Oh boy, the devastation was still unbelievable to see there. People heard about me from the state capitol, invited me to come. They all wanted them, the legislators. They made me sign these as if I was Picasso, the artist. And then someone said, quick, let's go run and see if the governor's there. So we brought one to the governor, and he was gracious in a couple of minutes. But that's, I say this not to pat myself on the back, but just to say that it's all of Genesis 1, 2, 3, 12, 3. It's not just bless those who bless Israel. And there are an infinite number of ways to do so. Let's talk about Hanukkah. First of all, in preparing for this wasn't really, I've grown up, I'm almost 58 years old. Hanukkah is in my blood. I've lived Hanukkah for 57 years. I missed one because I wasn't born yet. But it's so amazing, and Victoria, I'm really grateful for you asking me, because it's got my mind thinking about so many things that now need to be shared. I was interviewed by another podcast host on the Charisma Podcast Network, an authoritative Christian leader. He interviewed me about what I'm doing, and the podcast is coming out now, and he wanted me to speak about Hanukkah. So I did. But what was fascinating to me is he didn't really know very much. And it wasn't as if he was saying, well, Hanukkah's like the Jewish Christmas, isn't it? But it was just a notch above that. And I don't say this in any derogatory, pejorative way. It's just that in my journey, these years building bridges, I realized that Jews don't know a lot about Jews certainly don't know a lot about Christians and Christianity, and there are a lot of misconceptions that not only I correct but even fight. Oh, that's another one I'm really proud of. When I took on a horrible movie called Till Kingdom Come, another conversation. Horrible Israeli movie that depicted you as bad. And I'm not the only one, but I'm proud that because of my going public, they were not featured on PBS.
That's good.
Yes.
Movies from the other ones too, which
I know. I'll out any ones I can. So this Jews don't know very much at all, and have misperceptions about Christians. Christians the same way. I was speaking to a professor of Holocaust studies this week, and we were talking about anti-Semitism, and I told him I wrote an article once called "The 50 Degrees of Anti-Semitism," taking off on the more popular movie book thing. And there are, and I've actually been subject to anti-Semitic slurs by Christian friends who don't mean it in a negative way. They just don't know better. So one guy once said to me, a pretty major ministry leader, "You can't be Jewish. You don't have a Jewish nose." It's funny, but it's sad. So when this guy was asking me about the basics, I realized that there needs to be a lot more conversation. So today I'm going to try and go as wide as possible, but also as deep as possible. If we need to go deeper, then you'll prompt me to go deeper and wider to the extent that my arms go that way. And I wanted to share another fascinating story out of the Global Prayer for Israel, which became a series then. It was so successful that first year, 2 years ago, we did a series around most of the Jewish holidays, the biblical holidays. Excuse me, your book. I did a fabulous prayer event with a bunch of pastors throughout Africa. And this is so charming. One of them, who became a dear friend of mine, I was talking about it. I shared recipes, the traditions. I even sent Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah, and candles to some of them in Kenya and in Tanzania and Nigeria. So these people have a gift from Israel that they feature still. It's central in their churches. And one of the pastors said to me, "This is such an amazing." He said it live on the prayer event. He said, "This is such a great holiday. We should celebrate it more often." Without understanding, because of course it's not in Tanakh. So if you're reading Tanakh and not familiar with Talmud, then you don't really know anything about Hanukkah. Certainly if you're a Christian in Africa. But by the way, and I know, actually, what a great week to talk about it. Today or yesterday? Today, Sunday, is the anniversary from 1984, the beginning of Operation, which I always forget which one is which. The first operation to bring Ethiopian Jews to Israel, 1984, that began this week in 1984. Ethiopian Jews didn't know that there was a Hanukkah festival because they checked out of modern Judaism before the Hanukkah story happened, as well as Purim. And maybe that's a reason that Hanukkah and Purim.
You know that the story of Hanukkah is in the Catholic Bible.
I know that, but what I also know is John 10:22.
Exactly.
And this is what blows me away, because we could come here, and I've learned so much from you and your book. And one of the things that always will stick with me, and I corrected myself, is that they're God's festivals. And you approached, I don't remember which pastor, but you approached a pastor some time ago, and you were dismissed. Those are the Jewish things. They're not. They're God's festivals. And that means if we as Jews and Christians together, we observe them differently. We have commandments around them that you don't have. They're no less significant. And I knew this, and I did a little bit. I can't say I did a deep dive into John 10 this week, but enough to realize that is so significant, because we're talking about Jesus coming to the temple, the Feast of the Dedication, and it was winter, right?
Yeah.
But what I don't understand, by the way, about that, and maybe for another conversation, is it wasn't a pilgrimage festival. And Jews weren't commanded to come to the temple to bring an offering.
No, he was. He was at the oldest part of the temple that
Okay.
was still standing. That was dedicated. So he was at that Solomon's corridor or whatever.
But why was he there that winter at all? Why was he there for Hanukkah as compared to doing Hanukkah in Galilee? I understand why he would have been there for Passover. I would understand why he would have been there for Shavuot. But I want the Talmud on that. I want to know the rabbinic commentary on why Jesus was there. But because I think that's fascinating. And the fact that it wasn't a pilgrimage, it wasn't a festival, that you're required to make aliyah, a pilgrimage to go up to Jerusalem. I know more about that. I think that's cool, but either way, that brings us together uniquely. There's so many ways, but that alone, where the only scriptural verse that's not Talmudic referencing Hanukkah is Jesus being there. I mean, okay, he was a first century Jew. I get it. Why the Hebrew is why Dafka? Why especially that? I don't know the answer. But it's okay. So we'll dig deeper.
Maybe John 1. I just thought about it because he's in the first chapter of John. It also references to him as the light of the world. So maybe it has something to do with it. I don't know.
Okay, well, we need to discuss that further. I was also reading John 4 this week with the Samaritan woman, right? And I understood. I learned this week that it's chronological.
Yeah.
In Tanakh, it's not always. It's more or less chronological, but sometimes there's an outtake and you go over here and then you come back. But it's always chronological.
Yeah.
In linear history, but sometimes there are asides.
Yeah.
But that I learned that about John. Yeah.
But he would be there because celebrating the dedication of the temple and what the temple is.
It wasn't the dedication.
No,
That
but
took place.
it's the remembrance of.
Okay, but why was he not there the year before, or was he? And that was it not?
It may be.
Was it not chronicled? And was he there the year after? I don't know.
He just has to ask all these questions.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
right.
curious, very curious.
I'm very curious about it. We need a Talmud to the New Testament to help enlighten all of us. But it's fascinating anyway.
That's one reason why I like John, because John does an awful lot of, Yochanan does an awful lot of, to me, the things that are really details that I want to know versus the repeat of the other gospels.
Well, I'm not well enough versed, pun intended, in all of the Gospels and the New Testament, so I can't speak to all of that. But in looking, this really triggered a lot of desire for information. Yeah, so we understand today. Yes, sorry.
When you say that, it reminds me of the Bible verse where John said, and I baptize you with water, but who will come one who baptize you with fire. And if I said, read John, the verse that you pointed in verse 22, and it says it was winter. There is no one who can survive the winter without fire.
Oh, very
And
nice.
that's what I heard when you were saying that.
Okay, that's
So it's because he has to point out that he's the fire. He will sustain you even through the dark and all this time.
a great metaphor. It makes sense.
Mhm.
It's not answering my question still as to why Jesus was there that year. I don't even know if we know what year it was, and maybe that's incidental, but I'm just put Jesus in the temple on Passover. I get it. Shavuot, Pentecost, I get it. Tabernacles, Sukkot, I get it. Hanukkah, what is he? Was he playing Dragon? I don't know.
I think he was there since Tabernacles.
He stayed. No, can't be. Because he was come. If you follow the chronology, John 4, he's in Samaria.
Right,
He's
Shemor.
making his way down.
Yeah.
He's traveling Route 6
With the
and then Route
Samaritan.
60 into Jerusalem.
He got
Six and
He
six.
got there in seven. He got there
They were
in
there.
seven.
Hey,
So is it chronological? That's also a question. Because
Well, I was told this week that it was, and I won't
Yeah.
say which pastor told me that. Okay, well, we can just, in any event, he was there,
Mhm.
right? He was a first century Jew. The temple still stood. By the way, when you come visit my apartment, we live in a front. We are now on the top floor of a new 7-story apartment building. And on a clear day, I can see where the temple will be. I can see the Golden Dome as the placeholder.
Mm.
And I can see the Capitol. I can look this way and see straight to the north. Jerusalem, the whole panorama on a clear day, even without the binoculars, you can see a glisten of the dome. And if I look to the right a little bit, I can see the skyline of Amman on a clear day. I think it's the only place in the world where you can see 2 state capitals from one location.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's neat.
Yeah,
I like hanging out on my balcony.
That's nice.
Anyway, so we know that Jesus was a first century Jew.
Mhm.
Sadly, I can say that here, I can say that relating to you and your fellowship. Maybe 50% of the churches that I go into, that's not a given, that people really understand that. And these are, by the way, pro-Israel churches. I'm not going into churches that are imbued with replacement theology. People just don't know that. So I think that it's so important that to be able to discuss today, a few weeks before Hanukkah, actually is we're celebrating to underscore that that is a common foundation of this holiday and why it's significant to us.
Mm.
And if I can quote a respected author as one of God's festivals. What are the themes? What's Hanukkah about? Yeah, you know, I know you know. No, that's cheating. It's cheating.
Exactly.
Bringing light into the world.
And it's
Light into
also
the
about,
world.
it's about bringing, the temple had been desecrated,
Yes,
and there needed to be a cleansing for the temple.
yes.
And God has a certain way that he likes his temple cleansed and done. And this was a celebration of him providing enough oil. They only found one vessel that was still full. And so they lit the Hanukkah, or they lit the menorah actually, but
Good.
um,
Important distinction.
and yes, they lit the menorah and it kept burning because it takes a certain number of days to make holy oil that could be used in the
Correct.
menorah that would be approved by the Hashem for the menorah. If it's his menorah, it's got to be done his way. And so the Lord, in his graciousness, allowed that one day's worth to go the complete 8 days until they had enough oil that had been made and purified to be able to continue
Right,
burning the menorah.
right.
It's his building. It's his
Right.
It's his place and it's his rules.
And all of that's correct, not language that I would use, but all 100% correct, as it was the rededication. The temple had been defiled, not destroyed, as it had been hundreds of years earlier, and that it was going to be 200 or so years later again,
Right.
but defiled.
Yes.
But defiled.
Desecrated.
And that required a degree of purification and the miracle of the oil. What's the other? There's another thing. What about
They were able to
Maccabees?
overcome the Syrian army
It was a big military victory.
campaign, yes,
Correct.
and the miraculous one at that.
Indeed, miraculous on all levels.
Yeah.
That until this week, I actually didn't really connect it all, but obviously, in order to be able to rededicate the temple, you had to get bad people out. You had to get the Syrian Greeks, which I don't fully understand, but they were Hellenist Greek Syrians, bad people. They destroyed the land, they conquered, they defiled the temple. They didn't destroy the temple, so we, the Jewish people, could come in and purify it and rekindle the menorah. And those are inseparably related. It's not like suddenly a crew of 20 guys showed up at the temple one morning and said, hey, let's go and clean this place up. First, there had to be a military victory. So we're celebrating both of those but the third you missed, well, which is a traditional Jewish holiday, about almost every holiday, not fast day, is they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat.
See, yeah. The donuts.
Well, and
Latkes.
okay, and that's one of the and then so every festival in which they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, has its own different menu, and because of the oil, so the recipes that are traditional, certainly that we know in America, are latkes, livivot in Hebrew, which is basically a fried potato pancake. And I'm looking forward. They're good.
Yeah.
And more common in Israel than here, sufganiyot, which is basically a jelly donut, but honestly, Dunkin' Donuts jelly donuts,
Or not the same.
they're not the same, but in my taste, they're better because.
Really? No.
Well, I spent almost.
Bonadine donuts are the best donuts.
Yes.
What?
Okay, we're gonna have a rabbinic disagreement here.
Discord.
Oh no! In fact, I warned somebody against Rolladine donuts recently.
What?
They look pretty,
So
but they're not so tasty.
They're so tasty.
All right, well, we'll do a taste test, a virtual taste test. By the way, the best fried donut to me is if you can find them from a kosher and hot, is Krispy Kreme.
Yeah.
Krispy Kreme?
Yeah, Krispy Kreme is true.
But in any event, the donut, it's much more common in Israel, sufganiyot, but now it wasn't like this. Sufganiyot would be a bit of fried dough with a little bit of red something injected in the middle of it. Today they're works of art.
Yeah.
They are works of art, and you don't even want to bite into them because they're so stunning and they're creative. And but so those we have those two fried foods. Now someone shared with me, because I haven't been just sitting in my hotel room at night praying about this and contemplating what I was going to say myself. I spoke to some good Christian friends about it. Someone shared with me, oh, Jonathan, of course, there's another parallel that you wouldn't think of, but the same way that the Maccabees rose against the Syrian Greeks, Jesus represented that because he was standing up. I suppose one can say certainly against the Pharisees, but also the Romans. And I won't go into metaphors that are inappropriate or would be disingenuous for me as an Orthodox Jew to bring in, but you can all put those together, and that's quite significant, I think, in and of itself. Again, bringing the fact that Jesus in John 10 is telling us that there he is in the winter, spinning his dreidel in the yeah, hopefully that'll work in the temple. And I don't know what he was eating. I don't know what the traditional food is. But by the way, in other cultures, there are other fried foods that are eaten. So we shouldn't just take it as the white Ashkenazi, blue-eyed American Israeli Jew eating fried donuts and potato latkes. Everyone has their fried food tradition. What are the other traditions? Of course, candles, right? We light candles, one candle a day. There's a fabulous rabbinic debate as to how we light the candles. Does anyone know?
I do.
Okay.
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, tell me. Right to left, I heard.
Right, with the middle candle, do you do the middle candle being the shemesh?
It doesn't have to be in the middle.
Syrup candle.
All right, so what I know is that the shemesh is the servant candle, and we know that Jesus came as a servant, and he serves us all, and so it's the shemesh candle that then lights each of the candles. But I also know, and this is definitely...
That's not a traditional Jewish
No,
perspective.
totally not. And this is also another perspective from a Christian, is that, of course, the woman of the house would light the candle, and that I've also heard it explained that because she lights the candle and invites the Hanukkah season, that Mary, who's also a woman, brought light into the world because she gave birth to Jesus. So that's definitely not a Jewish thing. Because, no, I mean specifically that women light the candles, because in fact it's the opposite. Oh, okay.
All mitzvot, all commandments that have that are positive, I mean do something, and have a specific time obligation, are obligations uniquely for men. So the fact that we have an obligation to light the Hanukkah candles is an obligation for men. And I was going to mention this. I'm glad you brought it up, because in some homes it's good enough for the man of the home to light the candles for everybody. In other homes, all the men will light. In all the homes, like in our home, typically everyone lights. And with 6 children, and now grandchildren in the picture, it's the pyromaniac's feast, and dangerous because you have to light strategically. But yes, so there are different traditions, but typically as a mitzvah, as a commandment, it's one that's an obligation for men. But I'm glad you mentioned that. You also said correct, right to left.
Where you put the candles in right to left, and you light.
And you light left to right. So you're always lighting the new candle first. So if we look at these both happen to be, I don't know, traditional, but with the Hebrew word is shamish or shamash, shamesh, same word, means it's the what's a good English word? It's servant, but yeah, to use. It's the utilitarian candle,
Yeah.
right? And why is that significant? Because when I'm going to go into some of the blessings that we say, when we're saying the blessings and we sing it, we identify that we're lighting the candles for the sake of the obligation to light the candle, that they're not to be used for light. There's no purpose for them. So actually, you can't sit and read by the light of those candles, which not that long ago, 150 years ago, that's how people were able to light it. You only light at night. So, oh yeah, honey, can you bring me my book? We just lit the candles. It's light here. I can read for an hour until the candles go out. We don't do that. But the shamash, the middle candle, it's utilitarian. That's like the freebie. You can use that, and we use that one because each candle is unique. We can't use each of the 8 candles for a purpose other than to light the candle. So that's really significant. And of course, as many things in Judaism, whether we light from left to right, newest to oldest, or oldest to newest, was a source of a rabbinic debate. But still in Talmud, and that's fascinating that it's all chronicled, but the tradition is that we light the newest to the oldest. There's a lot of singing involved. I would say arguably it's probably the most musical of our holidays. And it's funny, I'm not a musical person. Typically when I go to a Shabbat or any other Jewish service, I don't like the singing. I happen to love the worship in Christian services, which is very unusual paradox, that I don't like it in my own community or environment as much. But in Hanukkah, there's a lot of singing. We sing the blessings typically. We sing, there are a bunch of songs. Oh, I have here, I deliberately printed them out, and we can look at them if you want, or you can just take them home. I wanted you to get a sense. It's a 2-page. The printer at my hotel wouldn't print double-sided, but it gives you an idea of just some of the really basics. You'll forgive me that the Hebrew and the English and the transliteration are not in complete sync, but you'll obviously see which is the Hebrew, which is the English, and which is the transliteration. But I want you to see what we're singing about. We're singing about miracles from God. It's not just, I was thinking of having you do like an Adam Sandler, show an Adam Sandler Hanukkah video. There are other songs that are modern and contemporary. Right, and are fun, and there's a great Hanukkah song that was done to the tune of one of Queen's songs, I don't remember.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Bohemian Rhapsody, right, I don't remember. It's a Hanukkah song.
Yeah.
So they're fun ones. And sometimes they're a little bit irreverent or not traditional, but these are the traditional ones that in an average home. Yeah, you have a question?
What is the difference from a 7-stick menorah and a 9-stick?
7. So good question. What's the difference between the 7-stick menorah and a 9-stick? So the nine candles we call a Hanukkah, or in English, if you want, Hanukkah menorah. The traditional one that you see, if you look at the logo of the state of Israel, or the menorah that was in the temple that the Romans took and put on the Arch of Titus. And then people deny that happened, which is a digression, but okay. That was a different, biblically prescribed, according exactly, and that did not have the same function. The Hanukkah menorah, the Hanukkah, is as it is now. I was going to mention, these are traditional in the sense that the shamash is in the middle. The shamash doesn't have to be in the middle. It can be off to the side. It can be behind. The only thing it has to be is higher, and all of the rest of them have to be lower. So actually, going back to my United Airlines once, I collected, there's such beautiful little bottles, Bombay gin, the little blue bottles.
Yeah.
I collected a bunch of them, and I put oil and wicks inside, and the light is gorgeous that comes out, but I had to figure out how can I use a shamash to light them, but it was really
That's a
beautiful.
good idea.
I also have one with single malt scotch. Yeah, Jonathan's sometimes fun. But we can go through these, but you get Rock of Israel, led our song, right? This is rock. I'm just the first word. We know that we're singing to God. Who can retell the things that in me and Malel? Who can count them in every age? A hero or sage came to our aid. This is God. And then Al Hanisim, which goes on to the back, is all of the miracles that we're singing. And I mentioned before that these, by the way, this is a prayer that's also sang for Purim. The other non-biblical, non-Tanakh festival that's so significant. So we're doing a lot of singing. We already talked about the fried foods. We play in Yiddish and common English. We play dreidel, right, which is the top. And here's where we're going to separate the men from the boys, wheat from the chaff.
Okay, wheat from the chaff.
Wheat from the
Men
chaff.
and boys would have girls here too.
Okay, wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the difference between, in Hebrew they're called sivivon. comes from the root to spin.
Mhm.
What's the difference? What's the difference between a sivivon or a dreidel here in America and one in Israel?
One letter. It's the one that says, well, those are great miracles that happen there or here. That's what's here in the United States, there. Versus in Israel, it says here, it happens here.
Correct. So here, I wish that I had the foresight to bring a bunch of them with me to share with you today. And this is one that was made here, or, oh, that's smart. Okay. So this is for, and I said America, but it's, yes, but it's for any place outside the land. The Hebrew letters are Nun, Gimel, Hey, and here Shin, Nes. It stands for Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle happened there. And I'm emotional the fact that when we play, ours say Nes Gadol Haya Po. A great miracle happened here. That's so cool. You can't do that.
No, we can't.
I love the fact, and I love the fact that my grandchildren, who are now 4, almost 2, and 6 months, won't really get this because they're Jews who were born and growing up in the land. And albeit that my daughter was an immigrant at age 11, she's all Israeli and she speaks English to my grandchildren. But that's an amazing thing. One of the differences, and I mentioned before, even in terms of the food, their difference in food. When I grew up here in New Jersey, we didn't do so much jelly donuts. That wasn't a thing. It's much more of an Israeli thing that's become more common, if you will, overseas. But
Jonathan, what do you say is your last line at Passover? Because we have a line here that we can say.
the last line in Passover is
Next year.
next year in Jerusalem, Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim.
What do you say that?
Huh?
We'll be back here. We'll be right back next
Oh.
year.
Right. Well, the singing. I think if you go into any traditional Passover Haggadah, it will say next year in Jerusalem. But when we sing it, we sing L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuya. The next year we will be in a rebuilt Jerusalem. So that even if we're in Jerusalem, even if we're sitting in the old city and looking at the Temple Mount where the temple was and will be, we're singing and praying next year to be in a rebuilt Jerusalem. That's it's significant. And I brought you a little taste of Hanukkah. These are common all over, but especially now. It's very customary that the dreidel goes with a game. You spin it. Some people don't like it because it could be interpreted as gambling. It's not really gambling. It's kind of just fun. So when you spin it and it lands on Shin, Shin, I think you get half.
I think.
No,
No,
Shin, you put in.
You put it
You
in.
have to put in, right. So each letter, you have to, I'll get you the rules if anyone wants to follow.
It's a gambling game.
It's a gambling game over chocolate, or raisins, or M&Ms. I mean, I suppose you could use pennies and nickels,
Yeah.
but this is just a fun thing. You like candles, you eat, you sing, you play dreidel. It's a fun thing for kids. So is it gambling if it's chocolate coins? I don't know, but there are chocolate coins over there for you to enjoy. I want to come back to the candles.
If you want to take a dreidel home, you can too.
Okay. And if you remind me next time I come back or next time you come to Israel, I'll see if I can grab a bunch of ones that have.
That's say code.
Yeah, and by the way, all my African friends have ones that say Pope.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's because that's all I can buy in Israel. I can't find these. These are a novelty. When we light the candles, remember we were talking about the fact that it's an obligation. Not just something that we do, but a biblical commandment that's obligatory to men, and women do it as well. And therefore, I think it's correct. I don't want to, I put an asterisk in case I'm missing anything, but typically when we do a biblical commandment, there's a blessing that goes with it. Like you heard me say when I was washing my hands before eating the challah, it wasn't challah, the pizza, the bread, and then before eating the bread, these are obligatory things. So there are 2.5 blessings that we say when lighting the candles. The first one is Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who commands us to light the Hanukkah candles. Second is, blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who made miracles, I love this, who made miracles for our forefathers in those days and at this season. Bayamim hahem, bazman hazeh. We're acknowledging God's presence in our lives as well, and celebrating that the fact that we can play this, that we're still doing it. We talked about my proclivity for worship and not liking the music and this being more musical. I'm not a good singer, which is why you're not hearing me sing. But it's one of the minor festivals. It's not something for which we have other than lighting the candles. There's not a particular ritual that goes with, and so every home can be different. You're not going to all gather for the same kind of meal in one place or the other, and because it's not a Yom Tov, a pilgrimage festival like Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So for Orthodox Jews, it's not a problem for cooking, for driving, for going on a teal hike or an outing with your family, or you're just going to the movies. But it's a great family time, and that's, by the way, also one of the tremendous significant things about being in Israel versus being outside of Israel. First of all, we have Hanukkah vacation, right? Schools close down, and unions, bless you, unions oblige, specifically the teachers union and others, that this is a couple of days off. And that's a normal thing, and it's a great thing because it encourages the families. But what happens now? We're almost on Thanksgiving here, right? I haven't been in a mall yet since I'm in America on this trip. But if you go into an average mall, what are you going to be hearing? Christmas music, and there's Christmas decorations. And when I was here in August, I was a little shocked that I saw already then, not Thanksgiving, Halloween, and then and Christmas creeping in. I love the fact that not only when you're out in the malls or in the public domain or TV commercials, everything's oriented to Hanukkah, even the buses, but that's always normal. It'll say Happy Hanukkah in Hebrew on the front of the buses in the electronic lights, but everything around it and all of the culture. And it's also, by the way, the same thing, like how early is it too early to be marketing Halloween, Thanksgiving, then Christmas in the fall season, and some people are shocked at how early sometimes that goes. Also, the sufganiyot, growing up in Israel, it used to be that you wouldn't even see them available till a month before, a few weeks before. Now, months before, everyone's making their gorgeous little things, which doesn't make it as special to have them during the holiday. The whole society is oriented around that, and the fact that it's not one of the pilgrimage festivals just gives us that extra ability to be more fun, more creative with our observance. But also in our worship, and I'm sure most of you probably know this, the Psalms, the Psalms that we say, 113 to 118, which we call Hallel, those are an essential part of all of the biblical festivals and Hanukkah and Purim, because we're thanking God. If you look at what they say, look at Psalms 113 through 118, we're thanking God for all of these miracles. Actually, that is one of the things that's ritually part of it's commanded, like the lighting candles. You have to say that. But there's also, because it's a tradition, and I mentioned before that there are certain things that you do that are obligatory that require making a blessing before. So for Hanukkah, it is one of those things. You say a blessing before saying that. Whereas, just by way of drawing an analogy, there's a difference of opinion depending on who you are and what your orientation is in Israel today or here when it comes to Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. We do say Hallel. We say these Psalms, but often it's not said, most cases, it's not said with a blessing before, because there is not currently and or yet or ever a tradition since albeit miraculous, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty and the establishment of the State of Israel is not a biblical thing that we're hanging our hat on. So there's not a blessing that's involved. I talked about the songs. These are the traditional ones. They're fun. There's great stuff. What's one page? And when you read it and you know the stories and you know the tradition, this one is specifically the verse for Hanukkah because it talks about on the second page the days of Matthias, Matthew, son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hasmonean, who's the how do we say that in English? The Maccabee. Yeah, the Maccabee.
Dynasty.
Right. And his sons. That this was a different prayer as compared to what we say in Purim, which is about Mordecai and Esther in Persia. But it's delivering the mighty into the hands of you delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, and many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the degenerates. This is not. By the way, I don't know where the translation I grabbed. It's not a word that I'm familiar with. Into the hands of those who cling to your Torah, and this is what happens. I won't say in all, but in most homes, you light the candles and you sit and enjoy the candles burning, and you sing the songs.
And you say what?
Sing the songs together.
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
So obviously children get presents too, so tell us how the presents work.
I want you to see my bedroom before you leave. What it looks like to get 20 grandkids, 8 presents each.
Oh dear. You gotta get a picture of that.
You gotta see it.
I
It's
want
not
to see it.
completely done yet, but
So,
The idea.
okay. I'm not gonna- There are different traditions for Christmas giving presents as well, right?
For sure.
I remember growing up that we would do 8 nights and a present each night. Now then again, my parents only had 3 kids. That was not as complicated.
started out pretty easy.
It starts out easy, and then there's this multiplication. Yeah, we probably did that when our kids were little, although I honestly don't remember. Sometimes presents would be experiences that we'll go out and do something. Now what we do, because my youngest is 17, and we'll buy presents for the grandchildren for sure. We're not with them 8 nights, so we're not buying them necessarily 8 gifts, but we're buying gifts. But now what we do in our family is, how we do that this weekend when I get home, is we have a lottery. Everyone picks someone else, and we say that it's a maximum cap of X number of shekels. My son-in-law loves steak. And so once I picked him and I bought him something like 2 kilos of really, really good steak so he and my daughter could have a really nice meal together one day. My wife and I I shouldn't say this. My family's listening, don't tell. We were up, we took a couple of days and went to the north and went to a town called Zichron Yaakov in the north of Israel, which is beautiful. Totally go there. And we went into the store and there were some things that we knew that odds are we're 9 adults in the family, I think. Yeah, 9. So odds are one of us were going to pick somebody for whom these gifts were relevant. So we just said we'll buy them and put them away. That was back in the summer. So we have them hiding in my office. But different traditions. Some families will do one gift every night for everybody. We're one gift, and sometimes that's challenging enough to find the right gift for. But so it's not an in-stone thing.
Thank you for explaining it though. For
Yeah.
this, for families that don't know, and I have so many friends that ask, and I didn't know if there's a special something about presents. I grew up in New Jersey too,
Yeah.
and my friends all got 8 presents, but they tended to be small, like tiny, like trinkets, like you would get, and then they almost kind of went big, small to big, like on the 8th day being the biggest
Oh, you actually
present.
just reminded me. I bought a great book today for my grandchildren. Maybe I should just save it and wrap it for Hanukkah.
But they just heard you.
What?
They just heard you.
I don't think my grandchildren are
Oh,
listening.
okay.
Sorry.
Oh,
I just found out why Jesus went to the temple
okay.
for Hanukkah, because there's a record of it. So, since the rededication of the second temple and the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days both centered around the temple, it was also fitting that the celebration and festivities involved the temple as well. In the late 1st century AD, Josephus records some details about how the Festival of Lights was celebrated from the time of the Maccabees up to when the temple was destroyed in AD 70. So it says in the Josephus accounts. Now Judas celebrated the festival of the restoration of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and omitted no sort of pleasures thereon. And he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifice, and he honored God and delighted them by hymns and psalms. Nay, they were so very glad at the revival of their custom, when after a long time of intermission they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship, that they made it a law for their posterity that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship for 8 days. And from the time to this we celebrate this festival and call it lights. I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that hence was the name given to the festival. Yeah, and then it says the mention of Jesus being at the temple for the feast of the dedication in John 10:22 is not mere coincidence. This feast did not require attendance at the temple, as did several other sacred holidays like Passover, Yom Kippur, you know all of them. But the feast itself was centered around the temple as being the very place where God's presence dwelt. And so the temple was also the center of worship and the source of national identity. The Hanukkah celebration was meant as a festival offering of thanksgiving to God for his deliverance and preservation of God himself, for what God himself had commanded to be built and which would bring pleasures to him. So it was it was a law that they kept.
Yeah,
But
but he was
since-
at the Solomon's porch or corridor,
Yeah.
whatever it's called, which was the Solomon's portion was the
Yeah.
oldest part.
So they were keeping that
That was the
as a
inheritance.
sort of a law.
Hanukkah is an obligatory. It is, and that's why
Yeah.
that's why we say the blessings on the candles, and
Yeah.
that's why we have these obligations.
Yeah.
And that by the way, but that's only, I'm not good at math, but that's only 200 years prior to the temple, the second temple being destroyed. It was like 160,
Oh, once, yeah.
160 BCE.
Yeah, the other part was.
Right, so that's when
Mhm.
this story took
Yeah.
place, to about 200, less than 200 years before Jesus was born.
Mhm.
So again, which is fascinating. Fascinating, I didn't know this. I'm trying to get an autographed copy of Josephus, but that was a joke. But it's fascinating to me that he would write about that, and
Yeah.
specifically regarding Judas, that my antennae are up, curious about that specifically. But I'm wondering, but again, if we look at all of the New Testament, if this is the only reference, I still don't understand, because it was the norm, albeit not another biblical
Yeah.
festival.
He just said-
Why was it that one year
That's
that is recorded? Does it
Yeah.
mean that all? I don't know.
Maybe that's just the one account that the disciples saw.
Yeah, but he's saying, what about
The year before, and the year before that, and the year after.
The Jews, everyone else.
Right.
No one-
Well, it
Wasn't-
says that they did go up. I mean, they did go up to gather.
They were observing it as first century Jews would
Yeah.
do it, but not with the obligation to
Right.
to go up to the temple.
Yeah. Well, there is something that Jesus says, where he says, if you don't outdo the righteousness of the Pharisees and Sadducees, like it's something about the righteousness. So it's coming. I think it's pleasing to God. What he was doing was pleasing because he was coming to honor the temple that God had built.
No question at all.
Yeah.
I'm just
I'm wondering
I
if that's
wanna know
maybe what
more.
it is, to outdo the righteousness, or like to, in a sense.
well, but the assumption in that notion would be that the rest of first century Jews weren't observing Hanukkah, which I suspect was not the case. I just don't. They weren't obliged to do it in the temple.
Right.
Again, so that just jumps out as being very cool to me. And again, I wish I had a Rashi or Shammai commenting on this to tell me, why did that happen? What year was it? And why was it that year? And did it mean that Jesus didn't go ever celebrate Hanukkah in the temple before?
Yeah.
Or there was a specific reason that year that he did. I don't know, but I just think it's fascinating, and I love the. And again, here I am, Jonathan Feldstein, the Orthodox Jew, who can still show you the bruise on my shoulder where God tapped me in the late 80s and said, "Be a bridge builder," and it's a figurative bruise, not really, and really, really in awe of the fact that of all of the festivals, this one is so connected to us as Jews and Christians because it's the only account in Scripture that we see that. It blows me away.
Can I
Yes,
ask a
please.
question out of curiosity? Is that the account where his family were not really believers yet, and they were asking him to go up? And he said, "You go ahead of me," and then he came like in the middle of the week, and I've always wondered about that. That had to have some
He
kind
was
of,
there.
I mean, I'm not reading it right now, so I
Miracles going on,
apologize.
the man with the lungs, blindness,
Right,
you know, he was bit and that
yeah.
happened
Right.
just before.
Right.
Mhm.
And where was
So,
that? Where was that
Jerusalem.
geographically? In Jerusalem. Okay. Yeah, he's coming down from Samaria.
Well, I don't see him coming from Samaria. He was there for tabernacles and he was staying, I mean, maybe in there, but I
So
don't
he
see
took
him
an
John.
excursion to Samaria
He might
to
have,
drink water from a Samaritan woman, and then he went back to
I
Jerusalem.
don't see that recorded between tabernacles and the Dead Sea location. From chapter 7 to chapter 10, it was all these, in John.
John 4.
Unless,
Looked
well,
at us.
you're saying this was linear, right?
That's what I understood.
Well, then this was John 7 was tabernacles. He was
John
there.
4 is the Samaritan woman.
Okay, well, that's before tabernacles.
So he's coming down from
Yeah, and he
Galilee.
stayed there at tabernacles until Hanukkah.
Yeah, I think that.
Oh, okay, fine.
I
That's
think
what I'm saying.
the Samaritan woman was before all of that.
It was.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
okay, so
Right.
so there's not a contradiction.
Mm-mm.
No.
He's coming down from Galilee,
Yeah.
and he makes a stop in Samaria,
Yeah.
He's thirsty.
Jerusalem.
and then he goes to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's funny because you said up to Jerusalem, but geographically it's south, so it's confusing, but yes.
Well, it's still up
It's still up.
the hill.
We know that, It's great though.
North is that way, so
Yeah.
you were Mr. Zion when you wanted.
Yeah,
That's
it
what
was-
you
that's where I was in my head.
We each have our individual compass.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I hope that I've given over something. Look, if we're only all going home thinking about, okay, why was Jesus there then? And why is that recorded? I want to know, and I want you to tell me what you find out. In addition, this is great stuff. I can, as much as I've gone wide, I kind of dug down a little bit. I'm open for questions, and I like to say when I do more formal presentations in churches, sometimes I refer to it as open mic night with an Orthodox Jew. So if you have questions about things that are not relating to Hanukkah, I'm happy to talk about it. If you want to talk about this more, if you have questions and insights and things you want to share.
I have a question. Because the Maccabees weren't from the line of David, I didn't think. And so how is it that they could be kind of like setting themselves up as kings later?
Actually, they were priests. They must have been Judah. So
I felt like some of them were reigning, trying to be, and maybe it was, they were doing it from the priesthood.
well, if we're reading the history correctly, they were, but they were also military leaders. So I don't know. I'm not sure that we can where we can hang our hat on necessarily that they're trying to be the kings as compared to trying to be the redeemers and kick out the bad guys.
You talking about that?
Yeah.
Well, the very first one that took Matthias's place with Judas was a very strong military leader. And then the next one was a very good political leader. And he was able to, make all kinds of negotiations and political movements. And then the next one was very religious. And so the priesthood was really kind of connected to that one. So they kind of did military, the kingship, and the priesthood, all through those three different brothers. And of course, didn't sit so well with the leaders that were Orthodox in a sense of wanting a Levite as a priest, and they weren't from the tribe of Levi.
Yeah,
And so there was always that contention. And then from there, it just became, giving over to Rome, and those of you who've been in my classes before in this history, it really gets down and dirty and political all the way through. And of course, giving all kinds of, afraid that Rome was going to take their position away, and then, keeping the power as well, afraid of somebody taking the power away. I mean, it just becomes the same old thing as far as dynasties go. And of course, they were not sanctioned as, the kings or the Levites as far as the Torah is concerned. But they took that. And the people needed it though. So they were like, until a better one could come along, was basically what the rabbis said.
And I'm glad you said that. And the first kings were also military leaders.
Yes, they were.
And if you even to modern day, they're between whether we call somebody a king or a president or a prime minister or other sort of state leader.
They were self-proclaimed.
Okay, but the point I was going to make is that sometimes they're in conflict with even their own military leaders. That the military leaders might overshine the political self-declared or elected or whatever it may be, and that becomes an internal conflict in and of itself.
I was just kind of worried because that always kind of bothered me when I do history and I'm like, wait, this is not the way everyone did this. They're not supposed to be
it
priests.
was not Torah based.
Yeah, not Torah based, and that really bothered me.
But it was an answer for the people.
And one of the things that really just blew me away my last trip to Jerusalem was, which wasn't really there when I was there in '96, was, how the eastern gates had been walled off because they're trying to keep Messiah out.
Right. That's gonna
But this last time that I was there in 2017, you could look to the side and you saw the ancient
Oh, it's
doors.
under there. Look, it's under there.
No, but they had been excavated out where you could see the tops of the ancient doors. And the verse came to me, lift up your heads, O you ancient doors, with the King of glory may come. And so all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, Lord, the ancient doors, they're lifting up their heads out from under the excavations. It's happening. It's happening. So anyway, it's just exciting. I'm grateful that you're here and that you're explaining things from a different perspective. I mean, from a generally different perspective, and I'm glad you made Aliyah.
Me too.
I think that it is something that every Jewish person should do. And there'll be some of us that'll be helping you go, and there'll be some of us saying, okay, we want to go with you. The scripture talks about all that. But anyway, so.
Yeah, thank you.
There was one other thing I wanted to say about that to Judy. In Zechariah 14, it says that when Messiah's foot hits the Mount of Olives, it says that it will separate north and south, and that a valley will go all the way to the former gates.
Wow.
So when it opens up, the former gates will be revealed.
Which is significant. Because these
And where is that?
So is that on the way to the
That's
Eastern
right.
Gate? Eastern
That's
Gate?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
between Mount of Olives and the
Kidron
Kidron Valley,
Valley.
going
Yeah.
through there, the mountain will separate
Right.
north to south.
Right of that,
And so it creates another valley like a T,
yeah.
and it goes right into the former gates.
Like looking
Yeah,
at
so it's
Oz.
underneath the Eastern.
Well, that's,
Wow.
and that's kind of
Yeah,
what
that's
I'm
gonna
saying
move
now,
all
because
those
ancient
grave
gates.
sites out of the way.
Yeah.
Example.
Yeah, don't worry about them. Yeah, you had a question?
Yes, so when I study history and especially about Israel, after they get conquered by Alexander the Great and he dies and he splits it with his 4 generals. When they fight over Israel, the 2 generals put them back in Syria, and Syria wins. after he desolates the testament and starts the abomination of desolation, after they cleanse it, I studied that the Torah that was in Greek, that was in Alexandria, because they turned it into Greek, many Jews that moved there. They returned it back, but isn't during that time Greek considered bad guys, as you said it?
The people or the language?
The Greek, the language.
The language, well, it was already common to speak Greek. I think ultimately, and it goes really to the Hanukkah story, it's a question of assimilation. I can speak English, well, that makes me okay, it makes me assimilated. I grew up in America. I have assimilated a Western culture. We didn't talk about the elections that just took place in Israel, but my orientation and my culture and my way of thinking in everything is coming from my first 40 years here. Having said that, when you make Aliyah and raise your children there, they acquire a very different way of thinking. It's no longer a diaspora way of thinking. And I'm not saying that it's bad, because I will still contend till my last day that there are really some good things that come out of this. But you always, whether it's Greek or English or Latin that comes a couple hundred years later, or any other language, you need to be careful. This is, I think, a lesson that's appropriate for all of us, is that we have to stay true to what what's the foundation of our faith and of humanity. And if we start letting going to the mall on Sundays take place of going to church and not having reverence for God and everything, because that's not common in the culture, or on and on and on, you can talk about many other things. That's where I think you begin to lose it. But it's amazing to have a 12-year-old sitting there, knowing as much as you do and asking such an important question. And I'll look forward in 40 years from now to have a conversation with you and see how you have continued to be an illuminating young man and an older man and follower of God.
Amen. So you mentioned Netanyahu.
I didn't mention it. I mentioned the elections.
You implied. But as an American, I've always been real fascinated with him. Where's he at spiritually, like Orthodox, that sort of thing? Is he contributing to the spiritual impact? And I'm sure he is to some degree, but for an American that doesn't know about him personally.
I would not say that he's an Orthodox Jew. I wrote an article about that recently, relating to the recent political campaign. I don't know where he is spiritually. I can't answer that. I don't have a guess.
I'm just wondering if he's really pouring into trying to get the temple rebuilt and things like that as a national leader.
Politically, I won't put all my money on that.
Okay.
That's not saying that he isn't, but he, as for the good that he is, a statesman who understands that everything is a balance to some degree. His entire career has been seems to me to have been about that balance and moving forward and maintaining his authority. I would contend, and I don't know this is a fact, but he's the longest serving prime minister of Israel. If he had wanted to annex Judea and Samaria, if he had wanted to come up with a way forget building a temple, right? That's an architectural endeavor. Jewish prayer, non-Muslim prayer. I have to remember it's important for all of us on the Temple Mount. That's also something that he could have advanced more. And very recently, he's affirmed what's called the status quo, which means officially no non-Muslim prayer on the Temple Mount. I will note, and I don't know this that makes his son Orthodox or not, but his son Avner, 10 years ago, maybe more, I don't remember, someone can Google it, won the National Bible Contest in Israel. he's not Orthodox. That's why it was so impressive.
Mhm.
The fact that a non-Orthodox young man would know enough to be able to compete
Wow,
and win.
interesting.
But I don't believe that he has a daughter from his first marriage, who I think it's safe to say their relationship is estranged. I believe she is Orthodox, but I don't think that they they definitely don't have a public relationship, for sure. But I don't know where he stands religiously.
Yeah, thank you.
And by the way, ultimately, it's not me to judge. Any other questions?
So for when you're Orthodox, are you only allowed to be from Akahazi, or you're allowed to be Shephardi and Akahazi?
I don't know what you mean.
You mean Sephardic and Ashkenazi?
Oh, Sephardi and Ashkenazi. It's not a question of allowed to be. It's a great question. It's a question of, it's important to say it the way I'm going to say it, where your family ended up in diaspora,
Yeah.
not where you're from.
On half.
Okay.
For example.
Right.
Yemen. And then.
Right. So, but some people will say where your family's from, and that's a misnomer because ultimately we're from Israel.
Mhm.
And we were kicked out a couple of times. My family ended up in Poland, was the last. Poland, Russia, Hungary, those were the last stops. Well, actually here, excuse me. This is diaspora too. But the Ashkenazi orientation comes from my family all being Polish, Russian, and Hungarian Jews. My son-in-law, like you, is half Ashkenazi and half Sephardi. His mother's family is also from Yemen, and his father's family is from Russia. So it's not something that you are allowed to be. It's like, here, you're a Texan, right? There's two kinds of people in the world. Texans and everyone else who wants to be, right? So you have the privilege of being a Texan. That's not something that you are allowed to be, or a Southerner, or a Yankee, right? It just is. So I just am. Now, digressing to a whole other thing, which I get heated in my own family, we're 75 years into the formal establishment of the state, but more than 100, 120, 30 years since vibrant re-establishment of Jewish life in the land of Israel. And today we approach these traditions, whether we come from an Ashkenazi background or a Sephardi background, and there are very different traditions, fascinating traditions that come depending on where your family came from. It's the style of worship, it's the kind of food you eat, it's other traditions that go along with the seasons and many, many other things. Yiddish and Ladino as being languages, as being the Greek, because they're adapted from Spanish and German. So again, but those became the languages, what they wear, the food, everything. It's fascinating. I contend, and I advocate for, and I ruffle feathers in my own family, that my Ashkenazi background is no longer relevant, because now we are establishing, it's called, in Hebrew, it's called a minhag, a tradition. It's not my Ashkenazi minhag that my father or grandfather or his grandparents came from. We're now establishing the tradition of the land of Israel. We're reestablishing that.
Mhm.
And that needs to be a hybrid of the Jewish return from all the world.
And that really takes some effort to bring all that together, because in their home, there's the Ashkenazi Haruset, and there's the Yemenite Haruset,
Correct.
which is Sephardi, and it's so different.
It is so different.
And
My
so
mom makes both.
she insists on that,
Yeah.
and I do the Ashkenazi, and your dad loves it, and so he's like, oh, what did you do?
Because that's how he grew up,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Apples and walnuts and red wine,
Yeah.
sweet wine, right? Yeah, but then if you are coming from Yemen and apples and walnuts are not on your Kroger grocery store
Right.
shelf, and you're using dates and
Dates.
other nuts probably, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, and the so many ways.
Mhm.
I happen to love Sephardi food, Arab, Middle Eastern food, more than the traditional Ashkenazi food. Now, maybe because that's what I grew up eating, and that's normal. but I just think it's so much better.
Because it's fried.
But it's so Ashkenazi and Sephardi is a function of where your family ended up in diaspora. Now, by the way, last thing I'll say, what's also fascinating is Sephardi, the word Sephardi, which represents Jews from Africa, Northern Africa, the Middle East, all the way to Iran, but it comes from the word Spain, Sfarad.
Yeah.
So originally, I don't know historically when we were
Spanish
just
Inquisition.
before. How do we get to Spain?
Well, I know at least my family came from the Spanish. They were like.
And went where?
Yemen.
To Yemen, from Spain to Yemen?
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
I don't know why.
Okay, because when that's fascinating, I've never heard that, because when Jews were kicked out of Spain, we dispersed all over, and it's very common today for someone like me, white skin, blue eyes, to actually be, if I were to do a DNA test, I might actually be significantly Sephardi, because 500 years ago, Spanish Jews left and went and ended up in Poland. I just came back this summer from, where was I? Venice and Croatia. During the Inquisition, when Jews were expelled from Spain, Venice was a very major regional power, which overlaid into Croatia on the other side of the Adriatic Sea, whatever border separates them. And Jews were welcomed there as traders with a D, not traitors, traders. But now today, those Jews would be considered Ashkenazi, because for over 500 years. Fascinating personal story. I hope none of the rest of my family's watching this. My mother had a really unique family. She had, I forget it. She had first cousins who became Catholic, one who became a Catholic, one who married a secular Muslim, Moroccan, and moved to Morocco. My mother and my uncle. I think that there was another one. I'm forgetting. And somehow all of them came from the product of a Jewish mother and a Mormon father, which is very big, very unusual. Yeah, I don't remember. I don't know. I just know that was a weird mix back then. Very weird mix. Why am I saying this? I have these cousins who I really don't know, who are secular Muslim Moroccans, whose mother were born Jewish, which makes them, according to Jewish law, Jewish and eligible to come to Israel under the law of return. And I was, after my mother died, so it's going back 16 years, I connected with one of them. We were going through my mother's house. My mother was fond of this one, of these cousins in particular. And I was giving away things that I wasn't going to take with me to Israel and nobody else wanted, but they were beautiful and meaningful and what have you. And so I went to this cousin, Nadia, and I gave her a beautiful lace tablecloth, so she would have something to remember my mother by. I had never heard her, I'm not going to say her name, because her last name, because I don't want to invade her privacy should this go out anywhere. But she was telling me, we were talking about my mother and how my mother always used to tell her, which she knew, that she's Jewish from her mother's side. And she knew that. She didn't need to be told that. But then she said to me, we were eating dinner together once, and she said, but I'm Jewish on my father's side too. I said, what are you talking about? She said, yeah, my father's family fled Spain 500 years ago and changed their name to make it acceptable in the church. And that was the last name that continued throughout their family. So interestingly enough, on both sides of her family, she was a descendant of Jews.
Wow.
But of course does not consider herself Jewish.
Interesting.
I've got one more
Yeah.
question I'd like you to answer, and then I think we're just about out of time.
Okay.
So I know there's different opinions in Orthodoxy there and with Orthodox Jews there in Israel as well as here, as to should Christians celebrate Hanukkah. Do you have your opinion on that, and why?
That's a great question. Should Christians celebrate Hanukkah? Can I widen it and just talk about Christians celebrating biblical festivals? Okay, because I think it's important. I'm not of the, look, I'm the one on Facebook who will more frequently defriend people who are Jewish, who are harassing me just because they come and look at you with his centuries of baggage and belief that I shouldn't go into churches, and churches are centers of idol worship, and you all come to approach Israel and the Jewish people with malicious intent. And I sometimes leave their comments up to be seen, and sometimes I delete them and just, if I don't have the patience. But 80% of the scripture that we revere is the same, or 80% of what you is the same as us. I think that for so many centuries, Christianity was hijacked by the church.
Yes.
In a horrific way, in ways that make people who are really believing Christians not have a clue about what the Jewish roots of Christianity are. And I'm not saying that to wave any flag, but how can you not, you're putting me on the soapbox, but how can a Christian not know his or her theological foundation? And know that Jesus was a first century Jew. And know that when you read the New Testament, I'll say more often than not, although I don't know that to be statistically correct, it's all tied to the Old Testament, to what the scripture that Jesus was so fluent with as a first century Jew.
Yeah.
And so the holidays those are the significant holidays.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think it's a shame if you Christians don't connect with that, don't understand it, don't integrate that in your life and awareness somehow. My one pet peeve, if you will, is to, and this is not as a blame, it's instinctive. We all look at things in our lives through our own prism. You can change your prism, but it takes a lot of work, right? You have to have very, very wide eyes and be open to things that you wouldn't think about otherwise. Sometimes there are adaptations or interpretations of things relating to biblical festivals specifically, or Judaism and Tanakh in general, that are, in my eyes, misinterpreted in a way that I can understand why someone would think it, but that it's not necessarily biblically sound. If someone wants to look at X and Y and say that means 3, it's not always the case. I don't think that's a problem for Christians to see that way, obviously, or think that. I just think that is limiting and not doesn't bring in as in-depth an understanding of what the actual Jewish foundation is and what the holiday is about.
Of course, we're going to look at things through a Christian lens,
Great.
right?
Yes.
So we're going to relate all of these things, how it connects to, our Messiah, how he has brought us he's brought us to Israel's God. He's brought us to this faith. And so we're going to look through that lens, and so it's going to be different.
It is going to be different. It should be different, but I can't give you an example. I'll think about it, because I really don't mean it in a way that's critical. I just think that sometimes there are interpretations that help underscore your faith, but that aren't necessarily sound based on something that's
It's a stretch, is what you meant.
a stretch. Now, can I see a Christian getting what's the word? Strength, being strengthened by that? Yeah, absolutely. And that's a paradox in what I'm saying, because that's a good thing to connect. I just wish you had a living room that was a million times bigger, and that everyone would connect with you and your understanding and this kind of a fellowship that really provides a much more, and I'm going to use a word that I know is judgmental, I don't mean to be, a much more substantial foundation to that. But I'm thrilled if yes, Christians need to connect with and in some degree observe the festivals, and I'm certainly not one of the Jews who find that to be offensive or theologically unfounded, because I think that it's time that you unhijack
Right.
your faith.
Yeah, one rabbi said once, you have your holidays, we have our holidays, leave our holidays alone, you just do it. But, like you said, we don't want those holidays anymore. We look at the roots of the paganism that's really rooted in a lot of our holidays, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
So, we're looking for a place to plug in.
I agree.
And so, yeah.
And by the way, where else are you going to find it? The only source is Judaism and Torah. And by the way, that doesn't mean even though Christmas has pagan roots and okay, odds in 100 and 365 that Jesus was actually born on December 25th. To me, that's insignificant because I don't know that we know or necessarily can know, but for Christians, albeit if you remove the paganism of it, it's nice to be able to, I think, nice to be able to have a holiday in the season, if you're doing it right, that is at least celebrating the birth of Jesus.
Yeah.
And if that happened on December 25th or March 12th or August 14th, to me personally, that's incidental. Of course, I don't really ascribe to the pagan things to which many Western aspects fall on.
Right. Is there time for one more question?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Could you, or would you mind giving us the Jewish resident of Jerusalem perspective on two sites, the Temple Institute and Yad Vashem?
Okay, full disclosure, I'm not a resident of Jerusalem. I look at Jerusalem from my balcony, but I don't live in Jerusalem. I live in the Judean mountains.
Close enough.
So the Temple Institute is fascinating. I don't know if he's still connected. Rabbi Chaim.
No.
Why am I blanking on his name? Fascinating guy. We were once on a plane flying home together, and I gave him one of my most brilliant fundraising ideas. You know the story of Nachshon, the splitting of the sea. It's a midrash. At the sea, the midrash is that the sea didn't part until this guy named Nachshon ben Aminadav walked in up until his nose.
So Chaim Richmond?
Huh?
Chaim Richmond?
Chaim Richmond. That's it. Yeah, I love him. He's amazing on many, many levels. He was sitting to my left on the plane, talking. I said, and why is that significant, midrash? Because this man walking into the sea showed his faith. And then God responded and split the sea. True, not true, don't know, but I like it. I like hanging my hat on that. So I said to him, I was calling him Chaim, not Rabbi Richmond. I said, Chaim, you need to set up a $1 billion capital campaign and have money in the bank to build the temple so God sees that we're ready. Now, God can bring it. There are many ways that the temple can, but I think the Temple Institute is fascinating. I don't fully grasp everything that they've recreated or where it is or how much of it are we ready to go. Like if the temple were to fall down today and we're ready to go, or we have the calves that will be eligible for the ritual cleansing and the ritual purification about a year from now. So we're more or less ready. If all of that would happen, I don't fully understand, but I think the Temple Institute is fascinating and has to be highlighted because you can't be in Israel and focused on Israel and Judaism and Christianity without the temple, and so we should revere that, celebrate it. Yad Vashem. I mean, Yad Vashem has to exist. In September, we observed the 80th anniversary of when my great-grandparent, no, Crystal Meth was
It just
last week,
happened, yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
80th anniversary when my great-grandparents and their children, grandchildren, and nieces and nephews were all rounded up and killed in Poland. We know the date. And we held a webinar with not survivors, descendants of this. The name of the town is called Conchita in Poland, a small community of not more than 1,000 people then. And the Jews were wiped out Shabbat in 1942, and it was a blessing to have more than 100 people from around the world register to this, and 80 years later celebrate that we're still here. It's interesting that you ask about the Temple Institute and Yad Vashem, because we wouldn't even have a Temple Institute if we had a temple. And the destruction of the temple, well, I don't know, and this can be your homework. I don't know if the destruction of the temple and our diaspora was the worst calamity that befell the Jewish people, or the Holocaust. I don't know. But they're neck and neck. But out of how many? How many Jews in the world?
I'm talking about in the destruction of the temple.
I know. What percent of the Jewish people was that?
Probably most.
Most, I guess. Yeah, and it was the underpinning of another diaspora. We had already been dispersed, and there were still Jews. By the way, one of the most fascinating things, and I know I'm digressing, in being in Rome, we got a Jewish tour of the Vatican. Fun. We got to see stones that were Roman bills of sale that the Jewish community in Rome, pre-destruction of the temple, were purchasing Jews who were brought to Rome as slaves after the destruction of the temple, because there had already been a Jewish community there, and Jews were fulfilling the biblical obligation to redeem Jewish captives.
Wow.
It's fascinating.
I didn't even know they had a tour like that.
Yeah, it's a little edgy, and then
Wow.
yeah, I can find out. Yeah, you look at the Vatican very differently than most people. Not in our lifetime. And I mean, it's been 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple. Maybe never. I kind of like to hope that Yad Vashem will get filled with cobwebs and it won't be so much relevant anymore, that it'll be ancient history and not something that we have to embrace. That, as I said, we're rebuilding the significance is what we have. We lost, and it's in it figuratively in our lifetime, right? No one here is 80 years. Not forget it, but not that it has the presence in our mind. Look, I don't know if you know this about me. I was very involved, and it's a different story altogether, but it's very significant in the Jewish history, in modern Jewish history. I was very involved in the movement to get Jews out of the Soviet Union. Google me and on YouTube, and you'll see a little fun piece from ABC News in 1988. You can see what I look like with no gray hair and no paunch. Well, I'm not now. I was a younger man. Thank you. But why do I say this? Is that in the 30 years since the Soviet Union fell and we stopped fighting to get Jews out, most people today don't know a thing about the Soviet Jewry movement. Even people whose parents and grandparents' first language are Russian, who came to Israel 30 years ago or 40 years ago. They don't know. Next, I'm going to get emotional. Last month or September, we hosted the 16-year-old son of my pen pal from the 1980s, who, when I met her in July of '85, proposed marriage in order to, completely in violation of US and Soviet law. I was going to marry her to get her US citizenship and use that as a hook to get her out. I haven't seen her since my wedding. Her 16-year-old son, her son, knowing my connection to the family, didn't even know the story of her family and their struggles. And, or that I was gonna marry her mother, which is so wild. Why do I say this in the context of the Holocaust? No, like Victoria said, we can't forget. It's important. Part of me as a Israeli Jew wants to focus on the future, wants to focus on building what God's given us. And that doesn't mean ever forgetting the past. I was in Sydney, Australia, visiting my daughter once some years ago. We went to the Jewish Museum. And we were sitting there at the cafe, and I was speaking how that the Jewish Museum was really a museum. And Judaism is so much more than the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
So Yad Vashem has to be, and people need to know, and people need to engage. And in a generation from now, I would even say more so, because there'll be no survivors.
Yeah.
They'll be gone. So the testimonies and horrors and the Holocaust denial, you have to know that that's history.
Yeah.
And I don't want to ever put it in the, and I'm maybe not saying it well enough, I don't ever want to put it in the rearview mirror so far that we don't look at it, that it's not relevant. It is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
And not in my lifetime. But I wonder in 2,000 years, in 1,000 years, in 500 years. I mean, we still talk about the Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I don't think the Jews will ever forget it, but I think the nations need to know about it.
The nations need to know, but as an institution in Jerusalem,
There's Holocaust museums all over the world.
I know, but he asked specifically about Yad Vashem and juxtaposing that with the Temple Institute. We need to know. This I'll say for sure. We as Israelis need to underscore the centrality of the temple and everything about that. That's been too distant from us. So I think that's maybe why I'm gravitating toward that being, whether it's the Temple Institute or just that notion that the red heifers that just came and I was at and reported on and did a podcast about. The Yad Vashem conflicts me because people need to know, but I don't want anyone to ever say that the state of Israel is a result of the Holocaust. They happened in, there's a cause and effect, but actually it was, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to defame him if it's not just, but President Obama, who on his trip to Egypt in 2009, made a direct connection. That's outrageous. Same way as 12 days from now, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UN vote to partition Palestine.
What did Obama say?
Obama spoke, I think his first foreign trip, or a major trip, he went to Cairo, and he drew an analogy that Israel exists because of the Holocaust. Go back and
out of the ashes of the Holocaust.
something. It was something that's what bases the justification of Israel, and that was wrong. And he was pandering to the Egyptian audience.
It's so much more.
It's much more, and I think, of course, the Holocaust happened, and therefore there was a crisis, and the world responded, maybe in part out of sympathy. But if you think about it, then when we finally took a vote at the UN 75 years ago next week, it was only 33 countries in the world that voted yes, and 23 either abstained or voted no. And the important thing, and why do I say this now? It is not, I love someone to check it and correct me if I'm misspeaking about what Obama said, but the gist of it I seem to remember. Israel does not exist and is not justified because of the Holocaust, nor because 33 nations voted for Israel to be established as one of two states in November of 1947. That authority comes from God.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we had to go through the Holocaust to get there.
One of the things that seemed to be the Lord was calling people back home, and people needed to come home. Those who did come home, yes, wasn't a very great place to be coming home to, and that there wasn't a lot of amenities like your pad. But those who came home in the late 1800s, they were spared.
Mhm.
And I think that it's important for all of us, take it as a lesson, that when the Lord calls us somewhere, that we go, because he knows what the future holds.
Mhm.
And also he has an appointed place where he wants to meet.
Mhm.
I agree. I would just complement that with thinking my great grandparents were able to get 4 of their children out of the world. My grandmother, a great aunt, and 2 great uncles.
Praise God.
And they apparently had visas to the rest of them, or at least not, I don't know how many, to get to America, but by the time they got their visas, it was too late. They couldn't get out. So it's not just being called. Sometimes there are impediments to being able to do so.
Mhm.
So it takes a crazy young guy like Jonathan to go to Moscow and propose marriage when you meet somebody as a way to bring somebody out.
Yes, anything to get people
And
home.
so we have to follow a calling, but where there's a calling that we can contribute to active participation, where we're not necessarily, what's it called? The central actor, but a supporting actor. We have that opportunity, and I think obligation to do. I want to thank you again, really so much, for being here, for inviting me, for all of you. Please take the presents that I brought, including the chocolate. You don't have to wait till Hanukkah to eat it. And
Thank you.
you're welcome to take my information and be in touch. When you come to Israel, come and visit. And God willing, when I come back to Dallas, I'll come back and speak again too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd like to close in the prayer, please.
Well, Father, we just thank you for this opportunity that you've given us a gift tonight, that you have given us Jonathan, that he has poured out your heart to us, Lord, and shared with us. And we just bless him, Father. We thank you for him. We ask that you be with him, Lord, in all of his journeys while he's here in the States, and protect him. May your angels go around about him, and may he speak your word, open doors of opportunity for him, and let the church hear what he says, God.
Yes, ma'am.
That this wonderful collaboration that you're creating between the Christians and the Jews, this bridge that you're building, God, is real and it's sincere. And Lord, we just bless him. We thank you for it. Hallelujah. In the name of the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we just bless you. Amen. Thank you for coming.
And tell your family, thank you for letting me come. I know it's hard for families to be apart.
If you would like to give to Jonathan, there's a basket right over here. We just want to bless you in your journeys. Okay, so. Okay.
Jonathan, is there a website that they can give if they don't have any checks or cash right now?
Genesis123.co.
Still streaming.
Blessing.
Genesis123.co.
Right, we want to do, oh yeah, I want blessing.
Yes.
They're over there.
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't give you one.
I would have been very comfortable. Basket, Mike says it. Yeah, they're sharing the basket. Yes. I have one.
I'm not gonna tell her.
You are as well.
Especially.
You see, I'm in your office. I teach my 8-year-old from 7.
Oh, really?
They're on every breath.
Sorry. I am. So, up here, it's a mess, but
We have several different kids.
Nice.
Kids.
I
understand my children, my babies, they have had Hanukkah too.
So they go back.
They just finished over there. They just finished over there.
I just say, okay, for 8 days, they know.
I know, but
This will be my second conversation because we're cooking in the frame, but I always begin the slammer on the feet.
Yes.
I went to the terminal Wednesday. And so they want to know how they have it. And so it's like right on where the information they can go. And I'm going to tell them what it's because they're like, say, I really wish there was black and white because I don't want to have.
I think what he's basically saying, he's being very diplomatic, but
Hey, how's Pastor Groveline?
He's doing good.
I saw that he worked his lost his sister.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, we saw that out last So your next Shabbat service is at the Dallas campus. It's gonna be the Hanukkah service.
Okay, so we're gonna have one more last year?
I don't know. I thought you already did.
You did, yeah. Okay. I love it this. See, when I used to live in the I used to go on,
Will you be there?
It's the same thing. So people that want to go see Robert live can just watch that. Others that don't care about that, they'll go about like we, and then we go back on Sunday. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing how the crowd runs.
I know.
I'm like,
So can I be honest with you? He was like building it up. And I thought, it's gonna be Josh. It's gonna be Josh. And then he said James.
what is Josh?
I really, I was thinking, it's a little bit backwards, and I'm like, oh, this is so kind of Josh's heart.
Good to see you again.
I just put into this hand, so I'm gonna give you the song.
That's really
So when your kids are processing they don't want to throw the baby out in the back. I'm like,
I'm sorry.
Not as
we have so many people on both sides.
There's so much to know.
I'm not gonna talk too much on
You know,
it.
you don't want to hear my. Actually, no, until they're in their 30s and like, wow. Oh, no, no, no.